Hi, welcome back, guys. Today we're going to talk about Section 2, Chapter 7, and it's nationalism at center stage. And as I shared with you earlier, nationalism has a good side and a bad side, but we're going to talk mainly about the good side today, and that is pride in being an American. The Supreme Court boosted national power with the Supreme Court case of Gibbons versus Ogden. Basically, what had happened was about who could license steamboat travel on the Hudson River in New York. In the end, they determined that the federal government was in charge of interstate commerce. Now, to define what interstate commerce means, it means commerce between the states, as opposed to intrastate, which is commerce or trade inside of one state. For instance, if you go to Georgia and you sell peaches, that's interstate commerce. Or if you buy peaches, I don't think you would sell peaches to people from Georgia. But anyway, by the way, you've probably heard that Georgia and Alabama may be merging into one state. Yeah, they said that Alabama has always wanted Six Flags and Georgia's always wanted the championship football team. But anyway, it's a joke. But anyway, another case, McCulloch versus Maryland, says that a state cannot overturn laws passed by Congress. Now this is huge and it will be tested over and over again. But it sets the tone for national power. And people began after the War of 1812 calling themselves Americans, not Georgians, not Alabamians, not Tennesseans, not Washingtonians, but Americans. The court would also limit state power. John Marshall's court blocked state interference in business and commerce. In Fletcher versus Peck, he voided a Georgia law violating the right to make a contract. And in Dartmouth College versus Woodward, the state cannot interfere with contracts. And this contract actually was a pre-revolution contract. Nationalism also involved our territories and boundaries. Secretary of State John Quincy Adams, who would later become president and was the son of John Adams, was guided by nationalism. He made treaties with Great Britain, which said no more weapons on the Great Lakes, and to this day there's no military on the Great Lakes, and also helped settle our borders and territories. Spain actually gave Florida to the United States in the Adams-Honest Treaty, and gave up what little claim it had to the Oregon Territory. And this is important. So now we're shaping our national boundaries. Not just the boundaries between states, but the national boundaries as well. Excuse me. So by 1819, this is what the United States looked like. Mexico was still ruled by Spain, but the Oregon country, which was claimed by the U.S. and Great Britain, was no longer included in the Spanish claims. And of course, here's the United States. And Florida would be given to the United States by the Spanish in the Adams-Honest Treaty. Probably the most important thing you'll be tested on over this chapter. You know what? That actually is not accurate because there's a lot of important things in the chapter. But this is something you need to know and remember. The Monroe Doctrine. Okay? When Napoleon took over Europe, the Spanish colonies in South America, some of the French colonies and the Portuguese colonies, while Napoleon ruled Europe, they declared their independence. Well, we know what happened. Napoleon was defeated at the Battle of Waterloo. And the Spanish especially, and even the French, said, hey, we want to take our colonies back in South America and Latin America. South America is part of Latin America, but also Central America. They want their colonies back. Well, Great Britain was terrified of this. And now we're friends with the British during this time period. Great Britain said, we're trading with these new countries in Latin America. We don't want them to go back to the Spanish or the French or anybody else. So, the British convinced us, since we quote-unquote lived here, we were the neighbor, to pass a resolution. President Monroe called it the Monroe Doctrine. And in the Monroe Doctrine, President Monroe said, This hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere, is closed to any more European colonies. If you already have an existing colony, which is still a colony, that's fine. If you try to take your old colonies back, we'll protect them. So the U.S. guaranteed the independence of the Latin American countries that had become independent during and after the French Revolution. Now this is tricky. There were a lot of colonies, and this is one way we know the British were behind this. There were a lot of colonies still here. Bermuda, Bahama, British Guyana. What was unique about those colonies that were still here? And they were okay to stay. Most of them, not all of them, but most of them were British. Of course, the Spanish still had Mexico and Cuba. Well, Mexico actually became independent toward the end. But we basically told the Europeans, you cannot seize these colonies back. What's right about this? Somebody tell me what's right about it. There's some things that are right about this. We're protecting them, right? We're protecting people's right to be independent. What's wrong with this? Anybody? What's wrong with the U.S. saying, Spain, you can't come over here and take your colonies back? What's wrong with that? Portugal, you can't have Brazil back. What's wrong with that? What now? Okay, they can't take anything they don't own. Very good. What else? Okay, let me say that one of my neighbors claims that this trailer in his yard belongs to the other neighbor. And I'm good friends with both of them. But I go over and tell him, you can't take that, that belongs to him. That's a good thing for a neighbor to do maybe, but what's wrong with a neighbor doing that? It's none of my business, right? So this kind of, sorta, or sorta kinda, my favorite history word, this sorta kinda sets us down the road toward minding people's business that's not ours. Of getting involved in other countries' affairs, okay? That's not bad or good, it just is what it is, okay? But we also say we won't interfere with Europe. Americans also began to expand west. Most settlers go west for land and economic opportunity. Some to change jobs. Your textbook talks about Jim Beckworth, who's a trader, a scout, and a rancher. There's an issue, though. If we keep moving west, we're going to need new states. And as we need new states, will they be slave or free? And if it's going to be a slave state, that will upset the balance. And if it's going to be a free state, that will upset the balance. So, we decide to create the Missouri, or Henry Clay pushed forward and received the Missouri Compromise. We agreed to admit Maine into the Union as a free state, and Missouri could come in as a slave state. And then they drew a line right down the middle of the Louisiana Territory, the 3630 parallel line, which said any state that's created south of that line could be slave, any state north of that line could be free. Now you can tell by that solution that's going to be a very temporary solution. So, by the end of the 1820s, America looked like this. And we're about to get a large chunk of Mexico in the Mexican War. But currently that means that every state above here will become free and every state below here will be slave. This map itself actually shows free states in yellow, slave states in green. Okay? And the Arkansas Territory had slavery. It was open to slavery, but there were not a lot of slaves yet in the Arkansas Territory. And that concludes Chapter 7, Section 2. Please feel free to share this lecture with people all over the world, because everyone needs to learn about nationalism in America in the 1820s.